What's up?
You should be using this
On that side?
on my laptop.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Next time.
That's what I thought we were going to do. Yeah, that's okay. It's okay.
And we're live.
Hey everybody, this is Dan, and we are talking about a pressing topic today, which is college application essays, and why none of what you're writing about really matters, but rather why, it mattered to you is what matters. And so acing the college application essays is an art. It is a science and an art, but it is more so an art. And it is something that I've been doing for the past 12 years of my life. And so today, I will be showing you guys basically some of the biggest things I've learned over the last 11, 12 years of doing this, which is crazy because for many of you, this is probably the first time you will be seeing this, these applications, and might be the last time you'll be seeing these application essays, and hopefully the last time before you go to the college that you really want to. So before I dive into this, why did I decide to make this topic today? I think the world just doesn't do a good job of teaching students how to write really strong personal statements. Yet, every college that most of our students want to go to requires a lot more than one, right? UCs require 4. Private schools oftentimes require, 3, 4 themselves, right? You have the Common App main plus the supplements. And you have schools like Stanford, right, that require like 10, right, in addition to the application essay through the Common App. So the things that we're going to be covering today, the truth is it actually applies to every single kind of personal statement you can write. Literally every single kind of personal statement you can write. So let's get into it. The first thing is the topic that you're choosing to write about is overrated. Yes, I said it. Doesn't matter what you're writing about, right? And why I say this is because so many students, I think, have this feeling. They oftentimes come to me and say, well, there's nothing interesting about me. Or, or maybe it's the other way around. Maybe they come and they think they're all really hot stuff and they've done all these things on their resume and they think they have too much to write about. Truth is, guys, it has nothing to do with what you write about. You know why? Why? It's because we've read them all before, and it's not the theme, not the topic that matters, rather it's the theme that matters, right? What is the theme? Well, think about a topic as what happened, and the theme is basically why that matters, right? So if the topic is, okay, here's what happened, theme is like, well, why? And so think back to, like, for instance, when you were in the 3rd or 4th grade, when you were, still reading books and stuff in class, during story time or whatnot. At the end of the day, your teacher would always ask you, well, class, what was the lesson of the book, right? Or what was the theme of this story, right? And you would then say that theme. And the hope was that that's the one thing that you will remember, because chances are you don't remember the plot of the story that you read in the 3rd grade, but you do remember what that story was about. Just like I don't recall all of the things that happened in Lord of the Rings, but I do recall the primary theme of the overall story, right? So this slide that we're on right now, I think don't think too much about what you're writing about and how it looks to a college admissions officer. What matters more so is you convey the depth, right? The depth of the experience, whatever that was. And going on, I think this is a very common mistake that I notice a lot of students make, which is they write a lot like a Wikipedia page, right? There's what happened. Just like a Wikipedia page tells you, right, like, what someone did, when they did it, on all those details, but there's so little about why that even mattered, right? Who else was involved, how you were feeling, right? That basically the essay reads really flat and dull. And when you read it and you proofread it, it's the same, right? Go next slide. So, basically, just remember this, guys. In terms of making a story sound a lot like, I guess, what a story should sound like is, I'm getting moved around here on the screen, but it's basically to write a lot less like a wiki page and more like a story with a key takeaway, right? And so that requires us to understand really what is the anatomy of a story, right? Really, what is the anatomy of a story? And so let's find out. Going to the next slide, it's the arc, right? So when we think about the arc of a story, we always have some components, right? Why is there an arc and why is it not a flat line, right? For instance, I think stories, if they were like flat lines, then you wouldn't go to the movie theater because they'd be boring, right? What makes a story exciting is that there's something called an arc. And you can look this up. You can Google search it. I'm sure you'd find something like the narrative arc, the story arc. Long story short, it's things that you probably learned back in, guess what? The 3rd or the 4th grade, guys, right? What are those components? It's, well, every good story has a main character, right? It has the supporting characters, and there's a build-up, right? There's a climax, there's following action, and there's a conclusion, right? In other words, you have to focus on the W's, right? The questions, the W questions, so to speak, right? Which was who was there, not just you, right? When and where did this happen? What happened exactly and how did you overcome it? And why does it matter? Let's stay here for a moment because I think there's a lot of confusion as to how to execute specifically on this. When we think about who was involved on a personal statement, it should be about you, right? So if, let's say on a UCPIQ, you have 350 words and your first paragraph is about maybe your mom, or your first paragraph is about your uncle, right? And if that's the situation, then, well, you're probably detracting away from the point of the personal statement. It's supposed to be personal to you, right? So when we think about the main character, right? The personal statement is supposed to be the main character of you, not somebody else. So an easy way to determine who exactly is the main character of your story, right? Just simply do a word count check on who's being talked about most and when. Because oftentimes I find that students write about stories of their family members, right? It could be a very inspiring person, like a grandparent, an uncle, a friend even, or perhaps a mentor. And so the essay ends up not being about you, but rather about another character, a supporting character. So you have to make sure that you stay as the main character, right? At the same time, you want to describe, whenever appropriate, who was involved, right? And how do you do this? Instead of saying they, why don't you go ahead and use some names? It's a technique that I call humanizing your essay, right? You can humanize your essay simply by mentioning first names, right? A lot of people think, oh, but wait, Dan, like, if I, use somebody's first name, doesn't that identify who they are, and is that appropriate? Like, especially if they're a classmate of mine? Well, if you use a first name that's relatively common, not really, right? Like, for instance, a lot of people's first names could be Chris, or it could be perhaps, I don't know, like Jessica, right? It's perfectly okay to use first names, and especially if it's, in a volunteer activity, for instance, or an extracurricular program, where you want to basically just reference somebody you experience this with, it's good to use a first name because now the story isn't just a he or a she or a classmate, but rather I feel like this is a human story. There are other human beings that I've interacted with. So using first names is a huge way to kind of do that who was involved part, right? Secondly is oftentimes, it's interesting that we forget to just mention the basics of like when and where did something happen, right? Like oftentimes we start writing about an event or an activity or perhaps an accomplishment, and then maybe we go into time. Maybe we just, list out a couple of other things over time in the course of the same essay, and we don't even mention like when that happens, like, or when certain things happen. So like maybe you might start the essay off with something that happened in the 8th grade, and you clarify that that was in the 8th grade. And then you forget to mention as you're going through the essay, like the next things that happen, like, well, when did they happen? Was that right after 8th grade? Was that 10th grade? Was that, the summer after 11th, right? The point is, it's really good to clarify like time signatures, right? And you can easily do that with like, just in 3 words, right? In 10th grade, right? It's literally that simple. And, clarifying that. Now, obviously, you guys are really good at the what happened, right? I've been doing this long enough to say that. But I think how did you overcome those things, I think, is the thing that really gets a lot of students here. Most of our students write essays that have problems, right? There's a conflict, right? Like every good arc, I'd say there is a conflict, right? Main character has to overcome some kind of conflict in order to find a solution. But here's the problem, guys, is that when you guys write about the problems, I've noticed that many, many students, no matter what kind of student you are, whether you're a 3.0 student or a 4.0, many students don't make the problem sound all that problematic. Maybe there's like only a sentence dedicated to the problem. Let me give an example. So let's say a student writes an essay about having to take care of a cat. Yes, you might have noticed that earlier in the topics listed, cat. There was a student who I helped a couple years ago who wrote about a cat. How, you might ask? Well, the student had begged and begged and begged her parents to get a cat, and the parents eventually gave in. And guess what? Well, that wasn't the problem. The problem was she had never really been responsible for another life before, right? And if she left it at that, so if she left it at, I had never been responsible for another life before, right? So I had to learn. I had to then, buy cat food, and I had to learn how to bathe the cat if necessary. I had to do all these things, right? So now she's getting into the conflict, or so the solution. But what did she just miss? She just missed emphasizing and elaborating on the problem in a much deeper way. How about freeze that moment and say, I never had to take care of anyone else in my life before, right? Looking back at it, even asking for a cat from my parents, right, was kind of a selfish thing to do, right? And perhaps going into greater detail as to, well, why exactly is that a problem that you never had to take responsibility for someone else before, right? Maybe perhaps even thinking about how that might be a reflection of life itself. As we get older, what maturity might mean, right? Perhaps why my parents, disagreed with me in the first place with that, because they saw that I wasn't ready for that. And perhaps because, I don't know, maybe she was herself insecure about whether she could even do this. And by the way, she was. The cat ended up taking a pee on Dad's new carpet the very next day. And she thought about giving up, right? Those are details that are much needed, right? Especially when we're making this problem sound really crucial, because only if your problem sounds crucial will your solution hold water. So you have to really be vulnerable and write the pain that you actually experienced, or else your solution won't hold water, right? It makes sense. If your problem doesn't sound all that significant, then why would your solution be, right? So in short, it's this last question, which is, why does it matter? Ultimately, why does any of this matter, right? Before I get into any existential questions, let me show you something called a ratio, right? The ratio has got to be right. And so it's the what v y ratio, if you will. The ideal ratio, I think, based on my experience, and this is not exact, it depends on everybody's situation, but I think it's got to be 75-25, right? There has to be a quarter of your essay that's reserved for the end, specifically to reflect on what the theme or the core learning was from your essay, right? Too many students, I've noticed, in their first drafts, they write like 95-5, or sometimes just 100% what. It's just what this, what that, what happened, right? And again, that's like the Wikipedia page, right? Don't let your essay fall victim to that. You have to start any essay, to be honest with you, with the theme in mind. What is it that you're trying to have the reader remember? I'm going to say that one more time, guys. Don't start your essay off with a topic in mind. Before you even start writing, identify what you want the reader to remember. What is the one thing you want your reader to remember from this essay? And if your response to that, guys, after reading your essay is like 2 sentences or like 20 words, you better start over. Because if your response is what do you want a reader to remember is over 20 words, they're not going to remember a darn thing. Got it? So keep it really simple. Like, for instance, when I wrote an essay about jumping into the pool and almost drowning to save a complete stranger at school who had been pushed into the pool by some bullies, unknowingly, obviously, right? What did I want a reader to remember? How I overcame fear. Now, you might be wondering, how does that have anything to do with jumping into the pool to save somebody? I was not a very good swimmer. I was a terrible swimmer. I was very good at sports of all other kinds, but when it came to swimming, I had no idea what I was doing, right? I can make it probably from one end of the pool into the other, but I could not swim for my life. But I was the only person at that moment who saw that this guy was drowning, right? Everyone was getting ready to leave the pool because class was over. My essay was about overcoming that internal fear to do something good for somebody else, right? it was about fear and how I overcame that. And ultimately how that was metaphorical to who I was as a person, right? I take a lot of risks. I do. Right? So your message has to be so concise and clear that it's memorable, right? Or else no one's going to remember anything. Now I've posted a couple different ratios here, right? With a great, okay, bad, a good. I think 80-20 is probably the lowest I'd go for anybody, right? So for instance, how would we find this ratio? Well, simple, again, take word count of wherever you're at, whether you're at 300 words for a supplement, or you're at 600 words, right, for an initial draft of a PIQ. Just simply look at where your reflection is right now, take a word count check, compare that to the rest of your essay word count, right? And make sure your ratio is right. And if you're lacking in the reflection department, in other words, why does that matter? Then you better start thinking about a little bit more critically about, well, okay, why did this matter and how do I convey that clearly, right? So always start, guys, before you write an essay, with what is the one single thing you want a reader to remember, right? So going on, right, if there's one thing you take away from today, it's gotta be this, right? What is the one thing the reader will remember about you, right? And if you're not sure about the answer to this question, trust me, the reader certainly won't be, and they will not remember a darn thing you wrote, no matter how good your title or accolade was. All right, so going on, here are some advanced techniques. So maybe you've heard this before. Maybe you're like, great, I've heard these things before, Dan. Tell me something new. Well, here's some things that I doubt you've probably heard before. Number one is timing. Any good story utilizes very good timing. What do I mean by that? Well, think about it this way. In the whole Avengers series, right? Imagine if there weren't all those movies, and imagine if Thanos just showed up in the very first Avengers movie. It's probably really bad timing. It's premature, right? Just like what? Just like you giving away maybe everything about your theme in the very first, paragraph of your essay, right? Those are what I call your ace cards. You want to hold your aces to your chest until the final reveal, right? And so holding on to things that are very important to your essay, that are very important to the arc of your story. You want to time revealing of those things at the right moments, right? And so maybe instead of revealing everything about what you learned in your thesis, maybe just giving them a taste and making the reader beg and wait until you tell them really what that thing is in greater detail later, right? So timing is really key. But that's also timing of people, right? Maybe people you decide to mention in your story. For instance, a lot of people write about their experiences tutoring other students. Maybe instead of starting off your essay, right, talking about somebody you worked with, maybe saving that as an anecdotal example in the third paragraph, right? And giving us greater context as to what got you into tutoring in the first place before that. And using that person as a hallmark example of your accomplishment and your own contribution, right? So timing is really key. And if you're not sure about it, feel free to play around with it. You can always take a sentence, you can always take a paragraph, and you can move it, right, within your Google Doc or your Word doc, whatever you're using to edit, and see how it feels, right, when you read it. Secondly is this idea of a strategic wrapper. What is a wrapper? Well, think about like a candy with a wrapper around it. And your essay is kind of like that in that it can start with something that is representative of what you're trying to say, and it can end with the same exact thing. Let me give you an example. So let's say that same essay topic I just mentioned about jumping in the pool and saving that student, right? Well, let's say that I started off with the word, let's say, fear. I can start the whole essay off with the word fear, period. Right? And then I can go into something like this. For many years, I had claimed not to feel this, right? After getting rid of my arachnophobia from the 5th grade by developing a fond appreciation of nature, I thought I feared nothing. But here I was, standing outside the pool in the 9th grade, feeling it reverberate through my bones as I saw somebody drowning in the school pool. Not bad. That's not scripted, by the way. I just came up with that right now. Right? So, okay, let's say I start with the word fear, and then I go write my entire essay, give you all the details, and I can end the same exact essay, perhaps with the word fear, right? Except now, throughout the whole essay, my relationship with fear has changed. It was something that I was once trying to avoid, but now it's something I dive deep into, right? Things that require me to be fearful or that evoke fear for me now are things that I try to embrace and enjoy, right? So that's called a strategic wrapper. So that could be a word, that could be an idea. I certainly don't think it's wise to use a quote as a wrapper, but it could be a metaphor as well, which brings me to example number 3, right? Which is, what is a metaphor exactly? Well, a metaphor is saying something is like something without saying the word like, right? Like you are a tiger, right? Or I am the Tiger King, right? These are all obviously metaphors. I'm not actually a Tiger King, you're not actually a tiger. But we can use these very strategically in essays. How? Well, you know, that cat example, you can even use that as perhaps an instance, right? Where perhaps you can use that entire situation of taking care of the cat as a greater metaphor of taking greater responsibility, right? For everything, other people, right? Yourself, and all these things, right? So understanding that your life can be seen as a metaphor or representation of something greater, right, than just, you know, that experience, that is a very powerful, point of reflection that you can easily implement in your conclusion, right? Now, I'm going to go far and say I don't think it's wise to probably call yourself a tiger. That's not the proper use of a metaphor in this case. But you can certainly, if you're going to write about a certain topic, you can use that topic as a metaphor in the very first place, right? And last but not least is the catalyst. What is a catalyst? It's something you can imagine using right in the middle of an essay, where perhaps something was building up to a moment that really, 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 really challenged you and that ultimately transformed you, right? This is a perfect technique to use when you're writing about a very, very significant challenge, right? So whether that was, robotics, right? And overcoming a coach that, bred toxic culture within the team, right? And then eventually boiling up to a moment where you just decided to stand up against it and speak out, to the coach directly, right? Or perhaps another kind of catalyst, right? Something that was a bit more sudden, maybe something that softer, like maybe visiting your uncle in China, right? Or India, and sitting down for a game of chess. And your grandpa maybe said something to you that would change the way you saw how you play chess. By the way, this is an actual example. And it was a powerful one at that, right? We then would write basically how everything changed after that catalyzing moment. So using a catalyst at the right time, right, can be absolutely defining. And by the way, kind of a last takeaway here is when these advanced techniques are used correctly, you're oftentimes remembered more for the technique. For instance, if you use a metaphor correctly, they'll remember the metaphor, right? Or if you use a wrapper correctly, they'll remember the wrapper. So when they talk to another admissions reader about your essay, they refer to you with what you rhetorically used, right? So if your wrapper was, say, about fear and jumping in the pool despite being a terrible swimmer, right? By the way, I just got you there, right? That was a theme. Hello, right? And that's easy to remember, right? They can easily turn around and say, hey, Nancy, did you read that essay about the kid who jumped in the pool and just talked about how they overcame fear, right? Right? They remember you for basically the metaphor, right, that you're writing about, or they remember you for the thing that you're using in the very beginning, right? Or it could be that, hey, did you remember that kid who was inspired from something that, the chess player, when they were playing chess with the grandpa, in India said, right? Again, that's a catalyst, right? They'll oftentimes remember you for a very key part of your story as opposed to the whole story. They're not going to remember the whole story, right? And so the last, thing to go to is really, last game rules, right? Like ground rules for things to remember, right? One, tangibly, what do you do from here? You write without a word count, okay? Why do you do this, right? So many students, they approach these prompts and they say, okay, I got 350 words for the UCPIQ. Let's try to keep it under, right? Or, oh, I got 650 for the Common App essay. Let's try to keep it under. Here's the problem, is that if you are trying to keep it under, that means you're limiting what you're saying. And when you limit what you write about, you'll have very incomplete stories, right? Think about it this way. When someone's producing a film, right, there's a lot of deleted scenes. I'm sure everyone here has heard of deleted scenes, right? Why is that? Well, because they're shooting a whole range of possible scenes, and they're eventually getting rid of some that they just thought, you know what, that didn't really fit. It should be the same thing for you. When you start by writing any essay, you got to write without a word count first, and then identify your deleted scenes, right? Which parts of here maybe just don't really flow as well as the others, right? And then go down, because going up word count means you have to retrofit unnaturally, and it sounds really broken when you try to work with a product like that. Secondly is this 2-sentence rule. Super simple rule of thumb for you guys to remember. Never go 2 sentences without saying the words I or me. I'm going to repeat that. Never go more than 2 sentences without using the words I or me. Because if you go more than 2 sentences without including yourself in the sentence, this essay is starting to move away from you as a main character and more so about whatever was happening or whoever else was involved, right? So sometimes it's really easy. You can just flip a sentence to just literally include I believed, right? Or for me, right? To keep yourself in the picture, okay? And lastly, right, read it out loud. I know it sounds really, really like simple, but guys, when you read something out loud, you do something that you can't when you're reading it in silence, right? Oftentimes we read everything in silence nowadays, whether it's a tweet or a news article, whatever have you. What we miss is tone. What we miss is timing. When you read something out loud, you'll catch yourself, even making grammatical errors. Right, but specifically when you read something out loud, you start feeling what it sounds like and what it feels like, right? And if you're gonna submit your college applications and you got one shot, right? You're not gonna get another chance at this. If you got one shot at this, why would you not try to feel what this essay really feels like, right? So read it out loud. I know you're probably, cringy, right? Cringing already, probably thinking about what it's like to read your own essay, and that's good. You have to feel that way, but you have to feel very comfortable with what you've written, right? You have to catch the tone and the changes and things, right? The little things, right? And I'll end it with this. It's those little details that really do matter, right? And it's because college admissions officers are reading your essays, right? So let me just kind of wrap this up by saying this. One of the greatest myths of all time is that we don't read essays, right? We just use your GPA, your SAT score, and your extracurricular activities to make a decision. That was probably made up by a kid who didn't put effort into his or her essays. Right? That is absolute false, and I can prove that to you in numbers, right? We went from 1 essay, guys, in the UC system to 2 when I was in high school, and now there's 4 PIQs. Why would we increase the number of essays you have to write and for us to read if we didn't read them, right? We absolutely read your essays, and we absolutely care, and the reason is because we don't have the time to meet you in person, right? Unlike ReadyEdgeGo has the time to meet you and get to know you, these people don't have the time to get to know you in person. So their best alternative is to ask you to write about your life, right? So do yourself a favor, write these essays like they're really, truly your stories, and read them out loud and get a feel for exactly what they feel like. Ask yourself, what is the one thing I want the reader to take away? Is that clear, right? And if they feel something from it, if you can move them, and it is absolutely clear as to what you're trying to say, assuming your essay response answers the essay to begin with, then I guarantee you your chance of getting into that school is now much greater than some kid who's listing out all of the achievements that they've had on their resume, because it doesn't matter for that kid. I've already read about that in the activities and awards section, guys. I want to know why this matters and not what you did. So with all that said, guys, I hope this was useful, right? These are some of the learnings I've taken away for over a decade of doing these, and I've worked with some of the best and some of the worst students from all around the world now. So, take that 10 years and just shrink it into, I guess you can say, 30 minutes of wisdom. And if you guys have any other questions, feel free to just shoot me a message. Drop a comment, obviously, on the YouTube video if you're watching this later.